Welcome back. In this segment, we're going to continue to talk about the future model, and we're going to talk about the T in the future model, which are theories. And what are theories? Well, let's go back to our good old friend, the Oxford English Dictionary. And a theory is an idea or a hypothesis about what you think is going to happen. So remember that when you had unknowns, you had this list of things that you didn't know how they were going to turn out. Some you can do research on and turn them into facts. Others, no matter how much you try, you're not going to be able to get factual data on it. And you're going to have to begin to make assumptions or a hypothesis about what you think is going to happen. And that's known as a theory. And so this is one of the most important columns of decision making for reasons that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. But let's begin by talking about how you can develop theories and how you can test them. So the basic idea of a theory is it's an unknown that you can't predict or you can't move into a fact. And so you want to be able to say, this is what I think or presume is going to happen. And so you'll have something about, well, we can't find out the exact quality of the schools. We can get some general data, but we really don't know. And so you make a theory, which would be, hey, we think the socioeconomic status of the neighborhood is pretty good. We think school funding per student is pretty good. And our theory is it's really going to work out and the schools will be good for our kids. So that's a theory and a presumption. And what you then want to do is figure out a way, how much do you believe in that theory? How confident are you that it's going to, in fact, be the case? And I'm going to give you a series of tests that you can use to test your theories. And these aren't the typical sort of scientific things that you're thinking about theory testing, but they're, again, back of the envelope models. The first one is Karl Popper's question. And none of you may know who Karl Popper is, but if you studied the philosophy of science in the 20th century, you'd know Karl Popper as the world's premier philosopher of science. And Popper made a really interesting observation about the scientific method and its power. And in fact, it was rather counterintuitive. What Popper said was, science can never lead us to the truth. So no matter how many times we test a hypothesis, no matter what we think or how sophisticated our research models will become, we'll never be able to discern the truth because there's always the potential that a future experiment or a future investigation will prove our theory false. What Popper did say is science is incredibly good at determining what isn't true. So anytime a hypothesis gets disconfirmed, then you know that it's not true and not correct. And the scientific method, while it could never lead us to truth, has proven incredibly effective at pointing out falsehood. So Karl Popper's question about our theories, now you might think, I'd like to frame it as, what evidence could I find that would make my theory true? Because that would be a pretty normal question to ask. But think back to our discussion about biases and something that many of you have noted, the confirmation trap comes up here. Because if we start looking for evidence that will support our theory, guess what? We're sure to find it. We're sure to find some piece of evidence that can support our theory as true. So Karl Popper's question is, in fact, what one fact could I find that would prove my theory false? Not true, but false. So if we're thinking about the quality of schools would be very good based on the data that we have, but we really don't know, what one piece of evidence would help us determine whether the school is any good or not? And you might say, well, we don't, that piece of evidence might be if we were able to talk to a handful of parents and find out that they were very dissatisfied with the school, or we found out there's a major drug problem at the school, or we find out that the school is so filled with helicopter parents that it wouldn't actually be a good thing for us, then you'd say, okay, that evidence That one fact would prove that the school district really isn't where we want to live. Now, how can we go out and find that? Can we go and interview some parents? Notice this isn't just an unknown. We're not asking a broad question about what's the quality of the school. This is a very particular question about how could we find out that the school really isn't as good as it says it is. So what one fact could I discover that would prove my theory false? That's Karl Popper's question. The second question is the croupier's question, which is, and many of you probably don't know, but a croupier is the person who throws the dice in a game of craps in Las Vegas or at any casino. So they are the person who takes the bets and who allows you to then roll the dice and dishes out the money at the end. So the croupier's question is, if I had $100 to bet on this particular theory, how much would I be willing to bet? If I had to roll the dice, how much money would I be willing to put down that it's going to come up the number that I think? And just as a rule of thumb, if you said if I had $100 and I would only put 50 down, then you're not very confident in your theory being true. As a matter of fact, if you put down less than $85, you probably don't have sufficient confidence in your theory that you think it's actually going to be true. So again, when asked, what's the overall quality of the school district we're moving into? We don't know. We have a theory and we think it's good. How much money would you be willing to bet? Well, based on the overall environment of the city that we're living, we're only willing to bet $65. That means your theory, you don't have a whole lot of confidence in it. So if I had $100 to bet, how much would I bet? That's the croupier's question. Question number 3 is Dick McCann's question. Now, you may not know who Dick McCann is, but Dick McCann was my boss when I ran a floor covering company in Seattle. Dick was the owner, and I was the general manager of that floor covering company. And of course, as a newly minted MBA and person working on a PhD in business, I was full of wonderful ideas and always used to come to Dick with great ideas about how we could grow our business. New lines of business we could enter, new strategic partnerships we could try to develop, all with the hope of growing the business, but all of which usually required investment on the firm's part to bring that to pass. Dick would listen very carefully and he'd listen very quietly. And then he'd simply say, Paul, that sounds like a wonderful idea. How much of your own money are you willing to put behind this venture? And that was interesting because while I worked for Dick, I was certainly making some money, but I was also working on my PhD, and so money was really tight. And it was phenomenal how when I had to think about if this were my own money, would I be willing to spend it? I looked at those ideas much more rigorously and much more firmly, and I was able to see a lot more pitfalls in things that I thought were wonderful business opportunities that turned out to, in fact, not be as good as I thought. So the third powerful question is Dick McCann's question. How much of your own money are you willing to put behind this venture? And if you find yourself being hesitant, then you probably don't have a good theory. And even the realization that you're spending your own money to make many of these things happen, like purchase a home or move to a new city, can be a healthy reminder, a good slap in the face to help us be more robust and more precise in our thinking. The final question is really sort of a statement. It's really sit in my chair. And let me tell you about that. That was also Dick McCann. So in other areas of my responsibility, I had to run the business and had to make decisions about what we should do in terms of working with people, providing health insurance, working with clients, dealing with different issues, jobs we should bid on. These are sort of a lot of operational things. And I would have, again, innovative and great ideas because I'm an innovative and great guy. And I would go into Dick's office and I would present my idea about what I thought we should do. And he would simply stand up and he would point to his chair and he'd say, "Sit in my chair. Sit in my chair for a minute." And the invitation there was to think about what decision I was making from his perspective, not from mine as the innovative, young, exciting general manager who is willing to try a lot of new things, but think about it as an owner, as a business owner who had a very long-term interest in the success of his business and had invested a lot of himself in the business. And what I found was simply sitting in Dick's chair had a phenomenal effect in making me rethink and see more clearly things that I thought would be good and look for unintended consequences, look for ways in which my theory might have been false. And it's simply the old adage that when you can walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you'll get a brand new perspective. So let me just review. You come up with a theory because you can't resolve an unknown. You test it by Karl Popper's question. What one fact could I discover that would prove my theory false? You ask yourself the croupier's question. How much are you willing to bet that your theory is true? You ask yourself Dick McCann's question. How much of my own money am I really willing to invest? And finally, you take Dick's advice to sit in someone else's chair. Now, I told you at the beginning that theories were the most important part of this entire model in terms of decision making. We all wish that we made decisions based on the facts. We thought that would be awesome, and that's exactly how rational people think. But if you think about it for a moment, what you realize is we all make decisions based on theories. We all make decisions based on things we don't know for sure, but we assume will happen or we presume will happen. So, because every theory is about the future, and the future is necessarily unknown. So, as you're thinking about framing a decision or categorizing it or getting clarity, what you really want to be clear about is this column. What do I think and believe will happen? Because that, not the facts, is the basis upon which you're going to make a decision. And once you've robustly developed some theories about what you think is going to happen, you'll be ready to move on to the fourth column, or risks, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment.